I feel like I know less right now than when I walked in today. And that's a feeling that I kind of crave now. I'm excited to try to feel that way just because it shows me that I've picked something new up.
Welcome to the Talking Shop podcast, where I'm here to share stories, lessons, and experiences in sports performance and professional development. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Zach Cogen. How are you doing today?
Good, man. Good, man. Nice to be here, Matt. I'm excited to, just talk shop and pick each other's brains for a little bit.
Fantastic. We are here to make it happen after a long email text tag, just trying to get this recorded. But Dr. Cogen, Zach, at the sports physio _ absolutely killing the IG social media game. He is a performance physical therapist and the rehab manager at EXOS San Diego. And before that, he has a ton of experience ranging from UCLA, USC, the USOC, the US Olympic Committee, as well as doing his PhD out in New York and a ton of other stuff. So very exciting stuff. We connected just through the power of a DM, which is how some of my guests have come to be. So it's just crazy how simple it can be, or just how overcomplicated people make things out to be. So I'm excited to chat, to hear kind of about your story, your experiences, your background, as I listed a little bit. So I'm excited to hear kind of behind the curtains how all this came to be. So first, looking back, what is the most fundamental story? So kind of like the first, without X, you wouldn't have started on this path.
Yeah. So great question, as there are a few stories that pop into my head, but one in particular that's the most profound in terms of my path, my story, how I got to where I am, and how the overall general consensus of what an exam is supposed to portray or measure a person's ability to tolerate X, Y, and Z program in an educational field. It's going to go back to when I was applying for physical therapy school. So as an undergrad, I wrestled in college, and my grades were par. They were very average. They were not above average. I was very focused on wrestling, practicing, things of that nature. And I got caught up in that world, and school took kind of a backseat approach. And about halfway through my undergraduate experience, I decided that I had to, turn the gears up, because I knew I wanted to be a physical therapist. I knew I wanted to go down that road. And if I continued on that path with the grades that I was pumping and producing, it'd be a very difficult one for me. So I was able to improve my output slightly, but I was kind of behind the 8 ball. And I paid for that a little bit in terms of how schools responded to me when I applied to school. I didn't believe that the grades that I had reflected who I was as a person and what I could do, and my drive and motivation, which also kind of piggybacks into the GRE, so the graduate record exam. For those of you who aren't familiar, so to get into physical therapy school, a lot of graduate schools and the health professions, or just anything in general, you need to take that examination as an entry point that schools can see if you're competent enough to handle a caseload of courses that are rigorous, lots of homework, lots of exams, papers, so on and so forth. Can you comprehend reading for long periods of time in, an educational format? So I ended up taking the GRE 5 times. So it took me 3 years to get into school. The reason why I say that grades were kind of a limiting factor to me, schools had eventually told me that my grades weren't where they should be on my score reports for freshman, so all the way freshman through senior year, but they could see a trend in the right direction. And even after telling them my story, my GRE scores did not meet their expectations, which unfortunately was a massive rock in how to get into school, which was super frustrating. After the first year, I was like, all right, maybe I'll get a tutor, I'll study a little differently, try not to get too, unmotivated. And year 2, I took the test 2 more times, and I ended up not getting the scores that I wanted to. And I definitely got a lot more frustrated with myself, with the system, knowing that this test was ridiculous and does not reflect who I am as an individual, how I think, my emotional intelligence, my intelligence overall, I did not see it reflect that way. And me working in the physical therapy field, being a physical therapy aide, being around that setting, I could not understand what the relationship was between the GRE and being an actual physical therapist. So, fast forward in the story, I ended up taking the exam 5 times. And after 3 years, after almost wanting to give up, I was super close to stopping that track and kind of going on plan B or C, but wrestler's mentality, grit, determination, familiar with the sport of wrestling. It's an absurdly hard sport. So it's taught me a lot about how to be persistent. And I kept pushing and grinding, and I got through the door. And, once I got into school, it was like game over. I'm just going to continue, I'm here, I'm putting 110% into everything that I do. And I still do today. So the reason why I bring that story up is sitting here now in the position that I'm in, I can confidently say that the GRE has absolutely nothing to do with what I do on a day-to-day basis. So it was by far the most profound thing that I can think of when talking about my story, my path, and the significance of kind of what I do, and help the athletes that I work with today.
Definitely the most fundamental, as you said, like you were this close to going to plan B, plan C.
Oh yeah.
But kind of going back, so when it was that like junior, senior-ish moment when you decided to like, kick up your academic efforts, was it a slow building process? Like your freshman, sophomore year, you were like, yeah, like I probably should, but like I'm just so into wrestling? Or was it like a very acute moment, you looked at your report card and you were like, uh-oh? Do you remember kind of how that
Yeah.
feeling, was it more chronic or more acute?
Yeah. So I did flirt with some of those thoughts and feelings earlier in my undergraduate experience. I definitely told myself those things, but it still went on the back burner until I vividly remember going to my advisor's office, who is helping me plan out, and I went the route. I didn't do a science based undergraduate degree, so I got my BS in psychology, and I took the prerequisite courses to apply and qualify to be a candidate for physical therapy school for my DBT. So I went to my advisor's office, and I was pointing out, hey, I still have these courses to take, and they essentially kind of called me out. They're like, listen, you continue on this at this rate, and you get these consistent scores that you're getting on your exams, the things you're producing on your transcript, it's not going to go over well, and you're going to be fighting a pretty uphill battle. So that was kind of the moment where things kind of switched. A switch flipped in my head. I spent way more time in the library. I really tried to pick up the pieces, and I did the best that I could, with putting myself behind the 8 ball there. But I think everything happens for a reason. So I went through that experience on purpose. Not on purpose, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah. And I totally echo what you say about how the GRE has nothing to do with, being a good professional in PT school and all of this stuff. And I always equate that even more similarly to the CSCS, where it's like, it's kind of like a driver's license, you need it, but all of the things that I had to remember about how many miles per hour relative to a motorcycle and all this stuff, it's like, I've never used that ever. But at the end of the day, you need it to drive, and having my internship to be a sports performance coach in between my sophomore and my junior year ruined the last 2 years of school for me, because I was like, this is not how it works, So as you were, so I would assume, so those 3 years you were a PT aide, correct?
Yeah, so I worked as a physical therapy aide at a PT clinic back at home. I'm originally from New York, so I worked there for a long time, just trying to. I knew I wanted to be in that space, so it just made the most sense to me.
So how tough was it, or what were kind of those emotions throughout those 3 years of study, take the test, not get the grades you want, but then having to go to a PT clinic, and it's like, I'm literally doing it. Like I'm doing PT right now, not as a DPT, but you're in this space, you're getting experience. You're like, this makes so much sense. I can do it, but there's just this one thing, and over 3 years, kind of how did all of that kind of build up? Or do you remember those emotions of like going to work every day and you're like, I can do it,
Yeah, frustration is the first word that pops into my head. I mean, it was super frustrating. Being able to have the ability to be in that environment, but not get my foot in the door so I can be on the path to do that type of thing. As a PT8, I'm not necessarily diagnosing, treating, evaluating, assessing, prescribing movement interventions, but I'm able to take individuals through different things, work on my communication skills with clients, with patients, pick a physical therapist's brain. So it was frustrating, yet something in me just kind of wanted to stay engaged. And I was able to find a way to stay engaged on a day-to-day basis to still do good work, as a PT8 and try to make a difference in someone's life, even though I wasn't necessarily the person that was, driving the car.
Fantastic. So last question on this topic. Throughout this, 3, 4, 5 year journey, the last few years of school plus 3 years before you got into DPT school, who was kind of the biggest person, mentor? Was it a family member that kind of just kept you from losing your sanity?
So the first people that pop into my head are my parents. I mean, I spent the most time with my parents collectively as I was living at home at the time. And they ultimately pushed me they were part of the reason why I pushed myself and continued to push me each day when I did not want to do it. They knew how ridiculous the system was, that I had to get past this test to do something. And they knew me better than anybody else. So, I owe a lot of it to them ultimately keeping my head in the game and kind of pushing me when I would get down on myself. Cause like I said, it got frustrating at times. And so they're definitely the most profound or pronounced people that kind of pop into my head.
There's definitely been a theme on TSP thus far, and you'll be episode 102, fun fact, of just like no one has gotten, noteworthy stories of TSP without having one or many or multiple people kind of just to be in their corner, for like lack of a better term. But I think that phrase definitely does it justice. So definitely had to ask that. But it's crazy how such a simple moment like the GRE, or for me, I walked on and then my coach basically just, that's a whole different story. But it's like if I hadn't made the team, then how I went from walk on to College World Series in 1 year, what I did when I didn't get a jersey at the beginning of the season to then getting a jersey, and there's all of these lessons to where I think how you do something is, or how you do one thing is how you do everything. I think that's not exactly true, but I think that there are a lot of commonalities between how you do things, which I guess I kind of just contradicted what I said. But yeah, super fundamental. And like, it's not all, sunshine and rainbows. There's a lot of trials and tribulations, and it's almost like a survivorship kind of challenge, like who can just make it the longest.
Yeah. I mean, it was a grind. I mean, when I think back on that, it's a moment where I'm proud of myself that I didn't give up, because when you're so motivated and you have a vision and you really want to get to point B, there's way more than one path to get there. And no matter how long it could take, there usually is a way to get to that point B. It's just a matter of having the time and patience with yourself is what I've learned is the most important thing, which is something I'm still working on, to be patient with yourself. But it's definitely an important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and the biggest part of what you just said is having that vision. People can say, "Oh, I'm motivated and I want to do big things," but it's like, okay, well, how are you going to do that? Everyone gets the
Absolutely.
why, but they often forget to. You got to pair that with a what. Like you have to do something.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I can only imagine what it was like, because I've had similar situations, but it's like I know what I want and I'm going to make it happen. There's just a few things there. So super cool fundamental story. So next we'll get on to kind of the middle-ish part of your current career. What is the coolest story you have thus far? So someone was like, "Oh my gosh, you're like a sports PT, like tell me the coolest story." Like you could only tell one. What would it be?
Mm. So this is a tough one, because I love what I do so much that I think everything that I experience is really cool. It's exciting to get up every morning and go to work. I really do enjoy interacting, working with the elite athlete population. As, like I said, this was a vision that I've had. So I take in every moment like it's the coolest thing on earth, to me at least. So most recently, at the beginning of quarantine, when everything just kind of like shut down, I became a little more active on social media, on Instagram, and I had an athlete reach out to me, without mentioning any names, an Olympic freestyle skier, uh, who was going through something in her career that she was struggling with, and she had a long history of knee injuries on both sides, tore both ACLs, had reconstructive surgery twice on one of them, and then retore after having surgery on the other, and decided to opt out of getting surgery. And although in another country, across the globe, essentially, she reached out to, instill her trust in me to help her get back to her level of elite sport that she wishes to get at, which is essentially competing in the next Olympic Games. So competing in the prior games, she has the goal of getting back on the slope and doing what she's supposed to do and what she feels like she's meant to do. So I felt, it wasn't something that I've done before as a physical therapist. This was the first time I was working with somebody who was looking to manage conservatively, essentially trying to compete with no ACL in her limb, that in a sport that's extremely demanding, that has extraordinary requirements when absorbing forces in the ground, and understanding passively what the ACL contributes to in terms of our movement in 3 dimensions, and how difficult that feat is. I saw it as a challenge, and I was excited. And by far, working with this athlete has been one of the coolest things that I've experienced as a practitioner today. So, just to kind of press the small fast forward without going through, not going too fast or too slow. Over time, I was able to work virtually and assess virtually, which was a challenge in its own right, to be able to hit the nail on the head without putting my hands on something, to truly feel what's going on, doing my best that I can from a virtual aspect, from a movement standpoint, and from a prevention standpoint, programming, loading standpoint, all those types of things that you really take a step back and look at to make sure that this athlete is fully prepared to do what they need to do in competing elite sports, specifically what you need to do. Psychologically having those conversations with her, making sure she's mentally prepared, not just physically prepared, and making sure that that psychosocial standpoint is taken care of as well. So biopsychosocially, making sure she's all checked in and tapped in and zoned in on the goal. Just being able to work with her over time, and eventually, having point B being her initial competitions for qualifications to get into the games, to be on the Olympic team, as that's kind of the first step to get to where she needs to be. And, I had the opportunity to eventually work with her in person. I was able to, she came to America. She competed in a tournament. She was competing in a tournament out in Park City, Utah. And I had the pleasure and opportunity to meet her in person and work at the facility that I'm at right now in EXOS in San Diego. And we were able to work, and she was there for an extended amount of time. And we're finally able to, feel what things felt like, see what's going on, converse with her person to person, which is, obviously completely different, connecting with somebody at that level virtually. So it was able to take that communication, that camaraderie, and kind of just rapport to a next level. And being able to watch and see her compete in the US Championships, as she ended up making the finals, which was, she ended up making the finals and getting enough buzz within the Australian landscape to get the call from the Olympic Committee to, be on their shadow team, which is essentially kind of their kind of like prospect team for who's going to be going to the games. And watching her do her thing, and along the way having some setbacks, having a difficult time because she's dealing with some stability issues. She's lacking that passive stability, and the demands of sport, it's a lot for the body to handle. And without that integrity of that passive structure, it's tough to dynamically, tolerate those forces. So kind of wrapping it up, I being able to see it from beginning to end or middle to end, when she came to me, she was struggling considerably, and getting her to point B is compete, go through a full run, have one of her best scores that she's had in some time, and see her be excited because she ended up coming back to San Diego after she competed, and getting to congratulate her. It was a really cool experience that reminded me why I love to do this, and getting to put this tools and skill set and knowledge level that I've really worked hard on developing to help the athletes in front of me. It was really exciting, and it's kind of just the beginning of the story. I feel, at least for her, just because we still have kind of that next circuit for the Olympic Games. So very excited to continue working with her. But definitely the one of the coolest experiences I've went through so far.
Definitely do not want to understate the power of social media and a DM, aka how you and I met.
It's
Yeah.
Yeah, it's for as cliche as it sounds nowadays, I mean, it's becoming a norm in terms of communication channel and networking and things like that. So, the amount of respect that I have for her entrusting me with just kind of what she saw superficially, and after the evaluation that she felt so comfortable continuing to work with me, I'm extremely grateful for her trust in me. So shout out to, I'm not going to mention a name, but she knows who she is.
It's crazy how personal like a phone number and an email is, but there's 4 ways someone could pop up on my phone right now: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and like LinkedIn, but I wouldn't give my number or email out to like a stranger, but then, like it could literally pop up right now. So it's just so crazy. Like I feel like stuff like this happens more than someone would probably guess. So definitely do not want to understate that. But 2 questions kind of on that story. So first, so you'll answer the first one, but I want to share both just to get it out there before I
Sure.
forget
Yeah.
myself. So the first one is like, when you went from DM to agreeing to work with her, what was the process like of phone calls, Zooms? What kind of questions did you intentionally ask? Was there a few phone calls of simply just chatting, or like deciding to take on this not so easy endeavor? What was kind of the process from her first hitting send to your first official session together? And then the second question is, of course, we can understand the challenges of being through Zoom, of not being able to get your hands on someone, just being able to feel the emotions and just stuff like that. But having it started through Zoom, what is one of the benefits you think that came from that if you had been in person from day one, it wouldn't be the same?
So yeah, so the process was, it seemed pretty seamless. I mean, by hearing she, reaching out and her telling me her story, and seeing the adversity that she's overcome already, that was, easily, I mean, I love to work with all types of athletes, but I was particularly excited to work with that athlete just because of the story and the determination that she already had. And it was a simple DM back and planning a meeting via Zoom, or it was Skype or whatever it was, and just getting at that level of communication. I did not put a time limit on this evaluation. It was essentially a very long subjective, so a very long conversation with myself and her, and kind of identifying everything that I felt clinically was applicable and necessary to understand from a distance standpoint, because I can't actually put my hands on something, and kind of move and feel things. So it was strategically had to do some very intense investigative work at first, and then feel comfortable understanding what I wanted to see from a movement standpoint, and kind of move on from there, from developing a plan of care, prescribing the different types of things and interventions that would be most beneficial and specific to what she needed to do. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it was pretty seamless, and it was funky, doing it virtually, just because that is the first time that I've truly went down the virtual road. I mean, the physical therapy profession as a whole made this big shift to a telehealth model, and just to continue doing what we do and empowering lives and enhancing, the overall quality of life of individuals. That was the best thing at that point in time, since we couldn't see anybody in person. So, it was just kind of rolling with the times and finding out a way to make it work.
And that answered my follow-up question to that. Was that your first time doing that, kind of
Yeah.
through Zoom and
Yeah.
everything? So
Mm-hmm.
was it kind of copy paste of what you would do in person and then modify, or did you rewrite the whole
Mm-hmm.
script?
Mm-hmm.
Or when you decided, yes, let's make this happen, after having conversations, figuring out she's in the right headspace, and kind of just some of that investigative work. So, it's figuring out that it is a yes, and then figuring out, how do I make this happen? Was it
Mm-hmm.
rewriting the whole script? Was it I'm going to follow the same model, but work with what I have? Or kind of, how did you
Sure.
decide to make it happen?
Yeah. So no matter the setting, my clinical practice wouldn't change. My philosophy, my thought process, my logic chain, my rationale and reasoning for looking at certain things, prescribing certain things, wouldn't change. I'm uh, as a practitioner, I have one goal in mind, and to kind of stay on that path and make sure that I can figure out how to do that from a distance with good verbal communication, uh, was the goal, and that kind of just leads me into eventually understanding the importance of how you communicate with the athlete or the individual in front of you that's across the screen, and the cueing that you provide, whether internal or external, understanding how that can change or alter what they're doing. So being as specific as possible with the communication that I provide, demonstrations. So verbal communication became of utmost importance, um, from an assessment standpoint and from an intervention standpoint. So assessing became a little more difficult, obviously, than it typically would be, just from a testing and palpation, feeling standpoint. So it became way more almost all movement assessment, movement analysis, and it's different because in person, if I'm looking at someone move in closed chain, right, with their feet on the ground, for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, being able to, if I could provocate their pain with their feet on the ground, one of the things that I find is helpful for me in terms of where I'd like to take their programming or interventions, or what I'd like to look at next from an assessment standpoint. I will, add some sort of external constraint, or build up the ground for them, or take away the ground for them, or give them different cues to try to mitigate any pain that they would have reproduced with a movement that they did. So I'm not able to actually move or feel or kind of put my hand on a certain area. So it became, more strategically kind of finding different things, using a towel, using things that they have around the house to kind of help drive assessment or intervention or something along those lines. So it was just, you had to kind of adapt and feel comfortable pivoting pretty frequently.
Making it happen. So the second
Yeah.
question, which I didn't forget, but so looking back, now that she came to the States and you're able to work with her in person, and we've been in COVID for over a year now, what was one of the best things that came from having to do it over Zoom at the beginning?
That's a tough question. I mean, it has to be just having the time to develop a relationship with somebody that is purely based on, communication, active listening. Um, from a body language standpoint, there's only so much nonverbal communication you can pick up from a video call. So, it really was about developing that type of relationship with the athlete, and communicating, and just keeping in touch that frequently, that there was that trust level that was developed. And um, someone one could say that you can develop a different sense of trust through a virtual type of platform, but I just believe that it helped lay a foundational groundwork of um, just a rapport that, because it's important for the athlete to have trust in you and believe in what you're telling them, because they're entrusting that you're going to lead them down the right path. So I think that from that standpoint, it kind of spoke without even being said.
And it was almost that the standard or the norm was to communicate through, phone, computer, to where they were almost more accessible as opposed to waiting for the appointment or waiting to see each other in person.
Yeah.
Would you say that was part of it, that just to build that relationship, it was almost easier because it was almost understood that it would be through the phone, so it's a little bit easier to get in more frequent contact?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely. And and this is for all the athletes that I work with, I promote communicating as frequently as possible. I'm not the type of practitioner who's going to say, "Hey, you can only really hit me up during the week. Leave me alone on the weekends." I open the door for frequent communication as needed. If something pops up, if you tweak something, if you're feeling great, like you want to do something else, I like having that type of relationship with the athletes that I work with. So disclosing that in the beginning, I think, was a necessary, just a necessary step to take, and I think she took to it pretty well.
Fantastic. Very cool story. So last big question, or last big story, the biggest full circle moment you've had thus far. So kind of looking back after all the dust has settled, you're like, I'm really proud of how that played out, or how that ended up. What story would you share?
It's challenging to, as I said with the other one, it's challenging to think of just one story that came full circle, just because throughout my career, I find that I've had several of those stories when I sit back and I like just with good introspection and kind of just like self-evaluating and assessing and thinking about my experience and how it made me felt, and the positive and negatives take away from it. Each step and rung of the ladder has had that instant in that story. I'm gonna try to do my best to kind of break this into, it's one story, but have like two separate segues that'll be very nicely kind of seamless into one another. So specific with my background, right after school, I went into a sports physical therapy residency program. And I moved out to LA to continue that. And I was presented with the opportunity to apply for a sports physical therapy fellowship with USC, which that's when I spent my time working as a physical therapist for UCLA athletics as part of that fellowship program. And my experience during the fellowship was designed to develop, learn, create a logic chain thought process, and become more of a specialized type of practitioner working with a higher level elite athlete population, return to play within that Division I setting, and understanding the demands of what working within an interdisciplinary team consists of, how detrimental poor communication could be between disciplines, how rewarding it can be when it's done the right way. So those types of things and those experiences within the fellowship, looking back, knowing that what I wanted to do as a physical therapist later on in my career, working with professional elite Olympic level athletes and making a difference in their lives, having them accomplish what their goals are, I wouldn't be able to do that in the way that I now believe should be the gold standard, even though there isn't necessarily a gold standard. It's very gray across the field, but what I believe would be the best model to go by, I would not be able to develop that idea and notion and framework in my head without that experience. And I owe that a lot to my mentors during that program. Outside of the residency, my mentors were amazing. I developed kind of a baseline foundational knowledge of sports physical therapy in general, and the subpopulations within that sports PT realm of youth, masters, female athletes, the high school athlete, those kinds of things. But in the fellowship, being able to do that at a different level while getting mentorship, communicating with different individuals, running from a rehab standpoint, running the return to play process, and ultimately making very large decisions, important decisions for an athlete, and getting them back onto the field in a timely manner under different pressures and different people pulling in different directions. So it was looking back, that was a huge experience for me as a practitioner, and not just as a practitioner, but as a person too, from a communication level. lots of different personalities in a room and understanding how to communicate with different people and how to get the best out of individuals around you. So bridging into my role now and how that relates to what I did as a physical therapist at UCLA, from day one, what I've envisioned myself doing and what makes me get out of bed in the morning is being able to make a difference in an athlete's life, whether it's a post-operative approach or something chronic they've been dealing with that is difficult for them to crack that code, and they've been dealing with it for so long. Being able to see at the other end what they can do on their stage, and knowing that you had an impact without anybody else really knowing, it's an awesome feeling to really see, like, oh crap, like I worked on that with that person, like they're able to do that now. It's a profound moment to see them, whether it's on television, whether it's live in game, in person. I had the opportunity to work with UCLA softball a couple of years ago, won a national championship. I was able to rehab and work with a few different individuals from that team. I was able to watch a baseball game and see a pitcher on a mound for an individual that I worked with. And I had different experiences like that, watching the NFL draft and understanding that. I worked with our team at EXOS, and we all together we provided the tools for them to succeed at their combine, at the pro day, and to help boost their draft stock to get drafted at a higher rate or a higher round in a higher place, and accomplish their goals and watch them at the next level on TV. It's an exciting thing for me to see, to watch them do their thing. And there's no better feeling than seeing an athlete get to do their thing. And rewinding back to my residency, it was an awesome experience getting to have a high school athlete come in and tell me how good they felt, when they scored 3 goals in a soccer game and had 1 assist. It's little things like that getting full circles. That's coming full circle of it's a moment that is like, wow, this is why I pushed so hard. This is why I wanted to do all of these things. And this is why I took step A, B, and C. This is why I pushed myself through 5 GREs, an absurd experience to get to this point. So all full circle to really watch the person in front of you that you work with so closely and you connected with accomplish what they want to do and achieve their goals and do their thing. So that's the best way to kind of sum it up and kind of tie it in a nice bow.
Like you bring it full circle. You should be a podcast host. Back to the first story. But it's funny you mentioned that, because yesterday I actually went to one of my athlete's soccer games. She plays on a local high school team. And it's funny you mentioned that like, what went on behind the scenes. And it's not that, obviously you don't have to like broadcast, but it's just like, I was just watching her play, and it's like, she just looks different running. Or I know all the time that she put in to be successful on the field. And then consequently, just high school girls soccer is just super physical and brutal. And I was like, oh my gosh, like these girls are beasts. But it's like, I would challenge every person in performance, whether it's a PT, whether it's a performance coach like myself, to go watch their athletes play, because you'll have that kind of rewarding moment. But then also taking a step back, it's like, to do squats, to do cleans, to do all these agility drills, it's like, at the end of the day, how is this helping us actually play? And I feel like that's something that we can get away from, is like only thinking about like, what can we do in the facility? But it's like, why are we even in the facility in the first place? So that was just the first time for me that I was able to watch one of my athletes compete and play. And I've gotten some of those texts from parents. It's like, I had a middle school baseball player. It's like, he just rounded third base and slid headfirst into home, and he's never done that before, and it's like, that is just so cool to have those moments. So, but yeah, I can only imagine like on TV, it's like they're doing it, like that's why I'm here. That's why we were together. And yeah, I can only imagine just how full circle that must feel.
Yeah. And it's just one example of, like I said, any type of athlete that I work with, still working with, high school athletes right now, and still working with collegiate athletes. And it's not even just like the television aspect, but whatever platform and avenue that they're performing on, it's that's the dream right there. Again, to see them accomplish their goals as an athlete, as a passionate advocate sports fan. I'm a avid sports fan. I'm a Mets fan. I'm a big New York fan at heart. Mets, Jets, Islanders, Knicks. It's been a difficult road, but still loving athletics and having a true passion for it. I able to give back to athletes in that community and make a difference in their lives. It's everything.
Fantastic, fantastic. I could not say that better myself. So we will move on to second to last thing. So here on TSP, I love the stories, lessons, experiences, the theoretical, the philosophical, the things behind the scenes, right? Things that you won't read in a textbook or learn in class. But at the end of the day, we are all practitioners and we are all trying to do our jobs better. So if you had to give the listener one action item, one question that they can literally ask themselves on a daily basis, put on a sticky note on their mirror, what would that question be to help them get better?
So this brings me back to a time during my fellowship when I started to really feel the weight of how frequently, and I used to speak to my mentor about this all the time, and I tell him that I feel like I know less right now than when I walked in today, and that's a feeling that I kind of crave now. I'm excited to try to feel that way just because it shows me that I've picked something new up throughout the day, whether it's during a conversation with a performance coach that I work with, or during a sit-down meeting with the performance dietitian that I work with, or speaking with an orthopedic surgeon, or speaking with the athlete and learning about, I ask athletes all the time what they need to do on the field. I mean, arguably, I learned the most from the athlete that I work with in front of me, and it's being able to have those types of moments where you kind of you recognize that you don't know everything yet, and you're still always learning. So the one question that I find myself asking myself, on my ride home is, what did I learn today that I didn't know when I woke up? And I think that keeps me in check. It keeps me in check as a practitioner, as a provider, as working in a progressive, high performance elite sport model. Uh, you know, things are ever changing in the landscape, and I believe it's important to, just keep yourself in check and keep yourself accountable. And it's something I enjoy to do.
A feeling I'm very familiar with my own quarter life crisis that I'm going through, but that's a whole different podcast in its own right. But I'll add a little bit more perspective on that, to where it's that feeling kind of sucks. It's like, oh, like, how did I ever think I had this figured out? Or like how did I ever write that program thinking that it was like good, but saying that you crave that feeling. So consequently, well, if you hate it, well, let's say you never had it. Would you really want to never have felt that feeling before, of what was I ever thinking? Eric Cressy has a good quote, like, if you don't face palm looking back at your programs from a year ago, like, you're not growing as a coach. So it was interesting to hear you describe it as that feeling you crave. It's like, what am I going to learn today? What's going to give me that face palm moment?
Absolutely. I think it's an important notion to, just for the profession as a whole, in the performance realm. I think it's vital for us to be asking those questions, to be able to put the best product out there, to know what best practice is, to be able to make decisions based on the evidence, but also based on your own personal experiences, and kind of put two and two together. I think that it's just huge. So I do think it's, just piggybacking off what you said, it's important to have those experiences. It's important to have those feelings. And especially in my residency, when feedback was just being thrown at you and you felt like you just didn't know anything, you don't learn unless you kind of go through something like that. So, and I recognize the value in it, and that's why I continue to try to do that.
And last thing to kind of comment on that is, like, you didn't say, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid, or oh my gosh, I don't know anything. It was, the field is growing, and how do we make the best practice? So although it can feel super personal because it's you experiencing and it's your emotions, it's really not about you. If at that point in time you did do what you thought was best, you just have more information now. So super cool kind of perspective and question. and I'm sure that'll hopefully send some people down a good quarter life crisis like myself. But so now, end of the podcast. Thank you for your time. I'm now rolling out the red carpet for you to shamelessly plug whatever you got to plug. Where can the listeners get more of you?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're not familiar, I do have an Instagram handle. It's at the sports physio _. It's a platform where, targeted more towards the practitioner, the performance coach, with an approach that in my captions, I've had feedback saying that some people saying that it's a lot that I put in there. Some people saying that it's awesome to read those types of things. But I found when I started the account that it was hard for me to find content where people would break it down on more of a scientific, physiological level for a practitioner to understand, to truly understand the specificity and how movement interventions are prescribed. So that's kind of the goal of my account, is to reach the practitioner or even the athlete. And I've had a lot of athletes reach out to me that they're very interested in understanding their body. And I talk to athletes all of the time, like, hey, your body is your livelihood, especially for these professional athletes. You collect a paycheck based on your overall physical and mental health. It depends on how healthy you are when you step on the pitch or the turf or the diamond. I mean, it's, or the court, whatever it may be. It's huge. So I've had athletes kind of eat it all up. So also for the athletes. So it's a platform for people to ask questions, to learn a little bit, to pick my brain from a clinical reasoning thought process standpoint. So I don't have any website or any Twitter or anything like that. I kept it simple with just one handle. I don't it's difficult for me to go through multiple social media channels to kind of run an account as one person. But I do enjoy conversing with different people, meeting different practitioners and athletes across the world. So if you're interested in reaching out, speaking to me, feel free to shoot me a DM, and I'll do my best to get back to you, answer any questions, or talk shop.
The power of a DM, talking some shop on the
Yeah,
Talking Shop podcast.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, shout out to the team I work with over at EXOS San Diego right now. Working within an interdisciplinary team. I know we've had discussions and conversations about being part of an IDT, and the role of each individual and how integral it is in terms of the product that you can put out for the athlete, and how you can optimize their performance, empower them, emotionally, psychologically, physically, and just overall mitigate risk and optimize performance. And just another step, along the way. But the team that I work with over in San Diego, top notch individuals. So for those people right now, shout out to you guys, because you guys rule.
Fantastic. So a ton of insights, ton of awesome stories, and a ton of takeaways. So I'll just thank you again very much for your time, Doctor, and I'm looking forward to our next chat.
Cheers, Matt. Thanks a lot for having me on. I do appreciate it, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.